The Sewage Sarcophagus. Archaeologists have found plenty of strange sarcophagi in Egypt, but nothing compares to the legendary Sewage Sarcophagus that was found in the city of Alexandria in 2018. The sarcophagus is enormous and it's made of solid black granite. The thing is so big it could have easily been used to bury a giant inside of. Instead, though, it was used to bury 3 unusual and unidentified people. According to Nadia Kaida from the Antiquities Ministry in Egypt, the huge black sarcophagus contained the skeletons of 2 men and 1 woman. The woman was in her early 20s, while the men were in their 30s and 40s. The female was short, even for ancient Egypt, as she only stood about 5'3". The man in his 30s was roughly the same height, and that in itself is really weird. But the strangest part is that the guy in his 40s was practically a giant. He was a whopping 6 feet in height, which is practically unheard of for a man in ancient Egypt. So why were there 2 abnormally short people buried with an abnormally tall person inside one of the gnarliest looking sarcophagi ever discovered? It's a good question, but it's also a question scientists can't answer. Finding the huge hunk of granite was a big enough shock without learning about the curious skeletons inside. One of the male skeletons also had evidence of a surgical procedure in which their brain case was opened. Somebody drilled into this guy's head before he was put in the huge black box. Then, for 2,000 years, the sarcophagus remained buried beneath the streets of Alexandria, and at some point, sewage water seeped into it. When the stone coffin was first opened, researchers were aghast to find it filled with red fluid. They thought maybe it was a kind of preservation liquid, but that didn't turn out to be the case. In reality, it was nothing but sewage water festering in the coffin like a witch's nasty cauldron. Before we move on to number 7, I wanted to give a big shout out to Todd Tallman for giving us the super thanks. This channel wouldn't be what it is without supporters like you. And if you're new here and haven't already, be sure to subscribe and join the family. The two-headed giant mummy. The existence of giants is hardly a fantasy. On June 27, 1940, Robert Pershing Wadlow of Illinois was measured at almost 9 feet tall. He was only 11 inches away from being 9 feet, which made him a very real giant. Between the people who've been confirmed as giants and the countless ancient tales of giants, it's fair to say they aren't just creatures of fantasy. In the 1520s, Ferdinand Magellan explored the coastline of South America for the first time. He and his crew witnessed massive beings during their travels. One of the men on the expedition, Antonio Pigafetta, recorded his account of witnessing people in Patagonia twice the size of normal humans. According to Antonio, Magellan sent a man to meet with the giant, and he barely came up to his waist. Nobody knows what happened to these mysterious giants, but the Portuguese explorers were adamant they existed. In 1673, Spanish sailors allegedly captured a giant with 2 heads. The sailors killed the creature with a spear, then lashed its body to their main mast. It was an enormous creature that stood 12 feet tall with 2 heads sprouting from its torso. Another version of the tale is that the creature was already dead when the Spaniards found it, so they kept its body, and they called the deceased giant Cap d'Oie. There are no confirmed records of what happened to the 2-headed giant after it was encountered by the Spanish, but in the 20th century its body suddenly appeared in the US and the UK. It was put on display at various museums for nearly 50 years. Then it was purchased by Lord Thomas Howard in 1959. Today, the body of the 2-headed giant is still on display. It's part of the collection at Bob's Sideshow in Baltimore. According to Bob's Sideshow, Cap d'Oie was brought from Paraguay to England in the early 1800s by Captain George Bickle. It had been safely stored in South America ever since the Spanish first discovered it. But is Cap d'Oie a real mummified giant with 2 heads? Scientists don't know because it's currently sitting in a case at an oddities museum. It could be a fake or it could be the real deal. Nobody really knows. The mysterious species. Scientists were recently left shocked when researchers revealed the discovery of a mysterious ancient human species that buried its dead. According to paleoanthropologist Lee Berger, Homo naledi was burying its deceased loved ones 100,000 years earlier than any other members of the human family tree. It's a shocking claim that could change history. Homo naledi was an ancient human relative with a very small brain. And that's not an insult, it's just the truth. Their brain was roughly 1/3 of the size of a modern human brain. For that reason, scientists have always assumed the species wasn't very bright. They may have looked similar to modern humans with some of our anatomical features, but because their brain was so small, scientists figured they weren't able to think outside the box. They couldn't craft complicated tools, and they certainly wouldn't bury their dead. But the scientists were wrong. Lieberger and his colleagues discovered evidence of burials in the Rising Star cave system of South Africa. The burials were made about 335,000 years ago, at a time when Homo sapiens were only beginning to evolve. The discovery came in the form of 1,800 bone fragments. The positioning of the bones shows that they were laid carefully on the floor of an underground chamber in ritualistic fashion. This is baffling scientists because they don't understand how Homo naledi thought to do something so exceptional. Most ancient human species left their dead to rot or threw them in caves. They also occasionally ate them. A creature with a brain so much smaller than a modern human brain shouldn't have had the mental capacity to be making graves. Scientists really don't know what this discovery means. The one thing that's for sure is that it shows serious sophistication in the social habits of far more primitive creatures than us. Humans, as in Homo sapiens, are the only known primate to bury dead bodies. Except for some unknown reason, so too did our ancestors, Homo naledi. The Khushtim dwarf. In the middle of the 1990s, a strange creature appeared near the city of Khushtim in the Ural Mountains of Russia. It was on a hot day in 1996 when 74-year-old Tamara Prosverina came across an unknown creature in a pile of sand. There had just been a very strong thunderstorm, so the skies were filled with electricity. Then, there it was, an alien lying in the sand. According to the story, people of the city were shocked as Tamara walked through the streets carrying something covered in a blanket. She called it Alyoshenka and took it home with her. Everyone in the town thought the woman was crazy because she started saying it was her baby, even though she was in her 70s. And when Tamara was sent to a clinic for schizophrenia several months later, Alyoshenka was discovered in her home. It was a living, breathing humanoid that was barely bigger than an infant. The creature Tamara had found wasn't dead, and after she was dragged away to the loony bin, her friends discovered the weird life form in her home. She'd been feeding it cottage cheese and condensed milk. According to the woman's friend, the thing had no hair, but it did have huge almond eyes and red lips. It couldn't speak, but it did make bizarre babbling sounds. The locals thought it was a dwarf, not an alien, although it was so unusual that nobody could really agree on what the creature was. So they called it the Khushtim dwarf. After it died, one of the villagers got a hold of its body and mummified it. They washed it, dried it, and turned it into an oddity. Then, it disappeared a few years later. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the mummified dwarf. People have been trying to find the thing for 20 years. Scientists are skeptical, saying it likely never existed. However, keep in mind, the entire town of about 37,000 people seem to know about it. Even if it wasn't an alien, it could have been a mutant. There were a lot of witnesses who gave their version of events, all saying the Khushtim dwarf was real. The Dead Sea Swords. Forget about the Dead Sea Scrolls because archaeologists have just found the Dead Sea Swords. Researchers in Israel just pulled 4 extremely rare swords out of a mysterious cavern. The cave is tiny, tucked away in an isolated set of cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. Even after the search for the Dead Sea Scrolls, which saw every cave and crevice picked apart by treasure hunters in the 20th century, these swords remained undetected. So, experts from the Israel Antiquity Authority were absolutely shocked to discover them. The weapons are almost 2,000 years old, dated to the Jewish rebellion against the Roman Empire in the 2nd century AD. Researchers think the swords were likely taken from Roman soldiers and then hidden. Swords were the weapon of choice for Roman soldiers, so taking them would have been a big deal. It would have been like a military platoon having all their guns stolen, leaving them with nothing but rocks to throw at the enemy. The rebellion is known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt, and it took place between 132 and 135 AD. Researchers found a coin dating from the time of the revolt at the entrance to the cave. But it's the swords that have everyone's attention. They're in outstanding condition, though they're not exactly ready for battle. They're still horribly rusted and fragile from years of decay. The archaeologist initially went into the cave to inspect a stalactite, having no idea there was treasure right under his nose. Spoils of war. Scientists in Mexico City were left stunned after unearthing a collection of bizarre stone figurines. The stone figurines were taken by the Aztec over 500 years ago, and 15 of them were found hidden within a stone treasure chest, which was buried underneath Templo Mayor. Prior to the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, Templo Mayor was the great religious complex of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. After Spanish forces destroyed the city, they brought the temple to ruin. Then they built a cathedral over the top of it. It's only been in recent years that archaeologists have started uncovering the secrets buried by the Spanish. And in this case, 15 secrets tucked away in a fascinating stone box. 14 of the stone figurines portray men. Only one, which happens to be the smallest, portrays a woman. The big shock wasn't the figurines themselves, but their artistic style. They were carved in the Mexcala style, a trademark of the Mexcala culture who prospered in Guerrera, a state in southern Mexico that's located several miles from the old Aztec capital. But how did these mystical figurines arrive in the Aztec city, and why were they buried in a stone treasure chest? Researchers believe the objects were looted following a devastating battle. Leonardo Lopez Lujan is the director of the Templo Mayor project. He said that at the time the objects were stolen by the Aztec, they were already considered to be artifacts. They were at least 1,000 years old when the Aztec pillaged them 500 years before today. They were spoils of war, taken back to the Aztec capital and buried like something you'd expect a pirate to do. The stone chest also contained jewelry, beads, corals, and other precious items, and they may have been buried under the temple as offerings to the Aztec gods. Which Aztec god do you think you would have worshipped if you lived in Mexico City over 500 years ago? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. The Impossible Dinosaur. Paleontologists in Argentina received the shock of a lifetime when they came across huge skeletal remains. On the hills of the Patagonian steppe, they found the fossils of a truly biblical creature. This impossibly large dinosaur lived 90 million years ago and was 100 feet long. Its bones were so heavy that when scientists tried to transport them, they caused a traffic accident. Researchers loaded the dinosaur bones onto a transport truck, but the weight destabilized the vehicle. Fernando Novas, a paleontologist from Buenos Aires, said nobody was injured. Even when the dinosaur bones flipped off the truck during the accident and hit the asphalt, they were so heavy that they didn't break. Instead, these stupendously hard bones cracked the asphalt road. The accident helped researchers come up with a clever name for the newly discovered species. They're calling the dinosaur Chukarasaurus dripienda, which means hard and indomitable animal. The paleontologists didn't find an entire skeleton. They only have 7 different bones. They have some arm bones from a forelimb, one from a hip, and a bunch of pieces of a hind leg. But still though, the bones were a nightmare to move. When this thing was alive and had all its bones in its body, it likely weighed around 40 tons. But even if that were the case, it wasn't the biggest monster out there. The Argentinosaurus weighed almost double that, at a whopping 70 tons. Channels at Jerusalem. In the city of Jerusalem, a team of archaeologists just unveiled some strange channels. Not TV channels, obviously, but channels carved into the ground. They date back 2,800 years to when Jerusalem was ruled by the biblical kings Joash and Amaziah. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, channels like this have never been found within the borders of Israel. The channels create a sort of underground passage system, with their purpose shrouded in mystery. They were uncovered inside the city of David, the original beating heart of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. One of the first guesses was that the channels were used for animal slaughter. Because they're shallow, they were likely carved so that a liquid could move through them. This was something frequently done when animals were sacrificed to gods, with their blood sent slipping through channels as part of the ritual. However, scientists couldn't find any traces of blood to confirm the theory. The channels weren't big enough to carry water, maybe a trickle, but nothing significant for drinking or cleaning. They're totally unique and don't offer any hint of their function. The channels are at the very center of the city of David, suggesting they may have been part of a temple. They were definitely important to whatever was going on here almost 3,000 years ago. Yuval Gaddo with Tel Aviv University said the mystery only grew deeper as they continued to investigate the channels. They aren't connected to any water source, and they weren't used for sewage or disposal. They were built near a substantial building complex which boasted industrial and residential themes. The channels may have been used in food production or textile manufacturing. or their use could have been religious in nature. It's been a tremendous shock to archaeologists who can't seem to figure it out. What do you think the weird channels in Jerusalem were used for? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.